Now you're welcome along to the Huddle Breakdown. I'm Enda Call, and as you can tell from the title, I'm pretty happy today because Celtic have won 5 games on the trot, and the gap to Rangers is narrowing in the league. Jaco James and Alan Morrison are with me as always. Gentlemen, how are we getting on?
Good, thanks.
Better now that you're back, sweetheart.
I missed you guys. I know that everybody watching has missed me too. So I mean,
it was fun, but it was a bit like toddlers in the sandpit, kind of getting on with it. No one's getting hurt as such, but it's just not. It's a bit of a mess.
Yeah, the quality of analysis went up, but I think the quality of the people on screen, just looking at them, went down a little bit. The good-looking person, the charmer of the group,
definitely.
Exactly. Yeah. So listen, it's been a fun couple of weeks for once. Celtic have now won 5 games on the trot. I know it's not all league games. You're counting the Ferencváros game in there as well, but again, that's Europa League, so that's almost doubly important when you're thinking about the broad aspect of the club. So last night, Celtic 3-1 against Hibs in Easter Road, which is a really good result considering the previous results at that ground. Anthony Ralston got the opener, Carter-Vickers with a second, and then Kyogo finished it off in an exhilarating first half, or so I've heard, because I was actually training and I missed the first half. I got the second half. I got the combative, the backs, not so much backs to the wall, but the well-disciplined half from Celtic, and I seem to have missed the really exciting first half. Obviously, I watched back the highlights, but listen, we'll start off. Good positive results. Good positive performances. Ange said that the first half was probably the best that they've played this year. So, James, interested to get your thoughts on that. Is it the best that Celtic have played all year?
Pretty close. I mean, I think the part with part of the game against Betis, I think, was probably the other that would stand out as far as, and given the level of opponent, I could make it maybe a case for that. But yeah, I think the electric nature of the ball movement and off the ball movement from players, some of the one touch, I think that's was the most exciting part of really about 40 minutes yesterday in the first half. And it was, it was just amazing.
Alan, what did you think?
Yeah, it was interesting that the quick passing and movement and actually the pressing, really, that's what we're seeing. We're seeing aspects of the way Postecoglou wants to play coming through now. It's in some games it's all going to click together. What really came through against Hibs was the amount of time they won the ball back high up the pitch. I think Hibs gave it away about 8 times in the first half. I've only captured the first half data. I probably don't need to capture the rest, to be honest. But in the first half, they lost the ball in their own third around 8 times. And what was interesting was that the goals actually came from set pieces, ironically. But the reason that the Celtic won those set pieces in good positions was because people were breaking at pace, and they're almost like desperate fouls to pull people down, because otherwise you had Rogic or whatever breaking at pace at the back at the central defenders. So that high press and that ability to move the ball caused secondary issues for Hibs. You're not necessarily the best at defending set pieces anyway, and they were pretty poor in defending those two. And so that provided the platform for those. And then of course the third goal was a direct result of that pace and movement, which again, a turnover. Hibs were harried into losing the ball to Jota to Rogic, and then back to Jota, and then to Kyogo for the tap in was again, when you saw the highlight reel of Marino's Postecoglou's last team, that Kyogo goal was something you saw quite a lot of. So hopefully there's more of that to come.
Yeah. Keep your comments coming. Some early comments coming in. Strange Love the Doctor is saying, glad to have you back, Enda, but the fellows are a great listen anyway. I agree with that. The lads did a fairly strong job last week in my absence. Hopefully I won't be absent for too much longer. Interesting that you mentioned the high press and how successful that was for us. And I think that was largely down to a change in not the formation, but the lineup of the formation, with Mikey Johnston coming into the forward line. He went into the left, Jota went to the right, and Furuhashi through the middle. Mikey Johnston's an interesting example of a player that in previous regimes may have been looking like he was probably edging out the door, might not have had the qualities necessary to play the game plan. But Alan, I know you were sort of focusing on him pre-game in terms of what he can bring to an Ange system, and he does seem to have what is necessary to play a high press, high intensity game that you can give it to Jota to have the end product, or Kyogo to have the end product, but he has the ability to enforce this high press more than certain other players that we have.
Yeah, and the way his cameo appearances in the last two games, he'd looked really motivated. He'd looked really strong. He created a lot of danger in a very short period of time in both those games. Unfortunately, and again, I've only just done the first half. He was probably the biggest disappointment on the night, sadly, for me. In the first half, he lost the ball in the final third 8 times, which is as many times as the rest of the team put together. He had 2 unsuccessful, one unsuccessful cross, a couple of unsuccessful dribbles. He was caught offside twice. He lost the ball in possession 7 times. He was caught in possession with the ball. He lost another 2 tackles on top of that, but at least Celtic won the throw or what have you. Where he was good at backing defenders up into the box. He got into the box more than any other player 5 times, but he just lost the ball a lot. There was no that old cliche. There was no end product. He just couldn't then do something with the good positions that he created. And it's his first start for goodness knows how long. So perhaps we can give him that break. And he was probably part of a team that was pressing high, and his sheer presence and pressing at pace, I'm sure, was advantageous to the side. But in terms of when he actually got the ball, he was probably the biggest disappointment by far in that first half.
James, what about yourself? What were you looking at pre-game in terms of something to look out for, and did it come to fruition, or what was the biggest aspect that pleased you in the performance last night?
I thought that the selection of MJ was definitely the most interesting, and the one aspect that I was most curious to see. Actually, I commented on Twitter right when I saw the lineups. To me, the most fascinating aspect of the lineups was actually Hibs. I have no idea why Rogic was the plan. In my preview thread, I didn't even consider that they would go that route. Naive me, apparently, but to have a so-called destroyer in that role, I guess, is the mindset that they went with. But he just did not offer anything, and Rogic basically put him on a platter, and could not deal with Rogic and really anyone on our side. That selection and the way they set up basically allowed us complete free reign. That's what I think was a big enabler of the Ange ball through the middle that we were able to do, and how Rogic was just absolutely rampant in that first half before he got injured. So I thought that was the key to the game up until that point, and was an enabler to basically unleash what we've been hoping to see, which was a little bit more back and forth, more dynamism, less kind of anchored defensive narrow, which is what we've been facing. So they tried to play a little bit more, and with that selection, I didn't quite understand how they were going to piece that together, and we punished them big time. It was unfortunate we didn't convert a couple of more chances from open play. Obviously, the big Kyogo chance, and I think probably the interesting left-footed effort from Turnbull were the two most prominent. But yeah, the Rogic and what the plan was from Hibs was probably the most fascinating part to me.
We'll probably take it position by position, so we'll move back to the midfield in a second. Turnbull is a subject I want to touch on from this game. But what about the move for Jota over to the right-hand side, Alan? Did it work out? he on the left hand side he can cut in on his right foot and it probably provides a different sort of danger from him. So how did he get on the right hand side?
Well, what we didn't see was which we saw in abundance against St Johnstone was this tendency to be throwing the ball into the box a lot, which has been a bit of a feature even of the games that Celtic have been winning. And Jota is probably the most, he has the most successful crosses and he has the most unsuccessful crosses of any Celtic player. About 6.5 unsuccessful crosses a game, and that wasn't the case. So we weren't just throwing the ball in; we're clearly playing through the middle, which was again counterintuitive to how Hibs had set themselves up, where they packed 3 sort of workman-like midfielders into that central midfield position. Rogic, Newell, and Doyle Hayes are all kind of grafters, really. Newell's got a bit of ability on the ball, and yet it was through the middle that Celtic seemed to find the space, not so much out wide. As I say, Johnston really didn't create very much for Celtic, and Jota had one. Well, he obviously had the assist clearly, and he created a couple of one other chance apart from that in the first half. But generally speaking, he was quite quiet, really, by his standards. Where he stood out again is just his ability to find space and get on the ball. And it's an easy thing to say, but it's just a wonderful habit to be able to have. It means he's working hard off the ball. It means his first touch is good. It means his body shape is good. He's getting into good positions. And remember, he's always receiving the ball in under a lot of pressure. So that aspect of his game certainly shone through in terms of packing. He was the top receiver, if you like, in that first half. But in terms of, obviously the assist, clearly another assist for him. But otherwise, the 2 wide players were actually relatively quiet in that first half. And I think that was to do with a slightly different approach.
Yeah. Do you think that's probably not something to worry all that much about because so much play did go through the middle?
Yeah. No, I don't think so. No, I mean, you're always going to get inconsistent numbers from your wide players. I think Jota's shown. I mean, he got the stadium man of the match on Saturday, which was bizarre because I looked at the data and it was like, this is his quietest game easily his quietest game of the season against St Johnstone. And he at least got an assist last night. So yeah, no issues at all. He's still getting into great positions. He's still getting on the ball. He's still linking the play well. He's still available. So yeah, no concerns at all.
How much closer are we getting to the magic number where you can tell us if you think we should sign him or not?
Oh, I would. I've seen enough. 10 games. I've seen enough.
Okay.
Yeah.
Interesting.
I'd have him.
Interesting. I think that's the. I've finally drawn it out of you. So let's move back to the midfield then. The man of the match last night, or at least on FOTMob, their highest rated player was David Turnbull, who got 2 assists on the night, and I thought, from what I've seen of him in the second half, at least, he was controlling the game quite well and didn't really put a foot wrong. So, James, David Turnbull, is he starting to grow into this role now? Because that's a couple of performances now he's put in that he has shown himself to be a key player when it comes to actually getting goals, getting assists.
Yeah, I think the most encouraging part of his performance, I mean, he delivered on the set pieces, which we've talked about a lot over the last year. So those were just great deliveries. So that's almost like a specialist role that has a lot of value when he's able to do that. So I always kind of try to think of that separately because it is almost like a specialist thing. Where we've talked about some of his issues are more in open play. And I thought that was the encouraging part. I mentioned kind of the funny left-footed chance, but that was him running into the box. And I think that's something that he, as I think about Ange's style of play and his midfielders, that's something that should be happening more and hasn't been all that much, particularly from Turnbull. So kind of that dynamic run into the box with a clear chance. And it was an ugly finish, but those are the kind of chances we want to see him have and make in that role. And then the other ones where he's, he participated in kind of the build-up play and the linking with some of the clear-cut chances with Rogic through the middle. And that kind of, one touch, we've talked about how he's a little slow on the ball sometimes. And he was able to really link up in that one touch build up, and I thought that was really encouraging. He also pressed pretty well, which I think that was early in the season. He was quite good and actually a bit better than Rogic in a lot of the pressing metrics, and he receded a little bit over the last month, let's say, where he started to kind of drop off his levels a little bit. And yesterday that kind of flipped again, where he was the most active of the midfielders in engaging and pressing and being aggressive and forward in that regard. So I thought it was overall a really good performance. He's just never going to have that lightning speed. And when you get up into a team like Hibs that has a little bit more athleticism, I think you can see that. But I think overall a very well-rounded performance outside of him, maybe getting a goal. And that's his shooting boots weren't on yesterday. So I think he was maybe 1 for 7 or something on target. But he was getting into decent positions, so that's good.
Anything in the data that's been standing out to you with Turnbull, Alan, over the last couple of games?
Well, what was fascinating about yesterday was that Turnbull ended up with the best stats, and yet McGregor and Rogic were the more influential players, I thought. and I think it's something that James mentioned in his Twitter feed, that Rogic's numbers didn't tell you, do justice to his performance, I suppose, is really what it was saying. And that's absolutely true. We look at Rogic's numbers, didn't win a single challenge, 0-3 on challenges, was the most bypassed player, packed 14 times. He did lead the forwards in terms of recoveries. He had 5, and that was probably quite key. He only completed 18 passes. He had 2 he created 2 chances, 3 secondary assists, mainly through being brought down for fouls in key areas. Didn't have a single shot at all, and was only got in the box a couple of times. So his numbers actually weren't that spectacular, Rogic, but I think it's one of the cases where he produced a number of moments in the game that actually ultimately turned the game, especially his driving runs and his regains and being fouled, that then led to those 2 goals. So I think that was, and just the eye-catching nature of him bursting forward, and I think that all reflected. But the underlying data, Turnbull's numbers are far superior. 2 assists, 2 other chances created. Led the team in packing passes as well. So he just looked like his data was much, much better. And McGregor, I thought, when I've just finished watching back the first half, to me, McGregor absolutely ran the game. It was just at one point he had like almost double the number of completed passes to any other player. Now, again, although his attacking play wasn't particularly noticeable, he didn't have, again, any assisting passes, and he had 1 shot blocked at the edge of the box, which some people probably wouldn't even count as a shot. He just linked the play, and he kept he was the fulcrum for keeping the momentum and the play moving all the time. So, and again, that didn't necessarily come out massively in the data, other than just, he made a lot of passes, which people doesn't tell you a huge amount. So I think it was one of those strange games where McGregor and Rogic were very eye-catching when you're watching the game, but Turnbull had the best stats of the 2 of them. But I think McGregor's form, you're talking about the midfield in general, I think McGregor's form recently has been absolutely fantastic. I had him as my boy of the match against St Johnstone. I thought, again, absolutely terrific. And we saw him get forward more. I'll be interested to capture the second half to see how he did as an 8, but I don't recall him getting forward that much. And it maybe, as much as Celtic were just managing the game well, it may be that actually McGregor has found his perfect home in that 6th position. Because Bitton's great in that position in some respects in terms of control, but obviously doesn't move the ball as quickly, and he doesn't have that acceleration that McGregor has. So you think he's going to pass it, and then suddenly he drifts past 2 people, and that's suddenly opens up the game for everybody else.
By playing well recently, I presume you mean over the last 4 years, because
absolutely. But no, he's really hit form. I mean, he was out. Really means he's come back from his injuries. He seems to have really hit form. Which he's always a consistent player, McGregor. It's not like he dips in and out. But I think he's on a real purple patch at the moment.
Yeah, I think that sums up Tom Rogic in general. Is that he's just one of these players that is quite unquantifiable at times, where he's just produces moments of magic. And I like that's why I always say over the last maybe 10 years, yes, you have Dembele, yes, you have Edouard, but I would say Tom Rogic's probably my favorite player to watch, because when he does his thing, he is an absolute joy to watch as a footballer, and he just creates moments of magic like he did in the Scottish Cup final. He did come off injured, which is worrying. Again, another injury. Not sure how long it's going to be, but Near Beaton came on in his stead, and as you said, Cal McGregor moved up into the number 8 position with Near Beaton coming into the 6. Is that something that we think is going to be the way going forward if Rogic is out for a sustained period of time, James?
I can't think of another iteration at this point, given the consistency with which Ange has gone with that now, and the fact that Soro and McCarthy aren't even making the bench. I think would suggest.
So glad we give McCarthy a 4-year contract.
So I suspect that has to do with passing ability and passing range. To Alan's point, I mean, I don't think Beaton at this point is dynamic enough as far as quickness or speed that he's, a game changer in that regard. But he does, and he always has been, other than his ridiculous moments of madness that have been regular features, but kind of like reading the game type of intelligence, positional intelligence, if in that central midfield role, intercepting passes and being relatively smart positionally. I think he adds some value there, and he just has a range of passing that no one else in that role would have, of the available options. That is the one thing I wanted to circle back on Rogic, because it was the one data metric or stat that jumped out to me, which I think maybe made it feel more than more like he was dominant, is that he was just really involved. I mean, to an unusual rate. Y-Scout had him engaged in 21 duels in his 44 minutes. To put that in perspective, Turnbull had 27 over the whole game. So he was just in the mix a lot in that first half, and while he was on, and so he was on the ball a lot. As Alan said, getting those 5 regains, the handful of brilliant passes that set things up and chances. I mean, that's an abnormally high level of involvement from him. That's more of like a whole game level of dual engagements as opposed to 44 minutes.
No wonder his hamstring went.
Yeah, well, yeah. I mean, he was, and that's the other thing. I mean, again, this is anecdotal, obviously, and qualitative, but I mean, he looks leaner, he looks fitter, he's moving better, and I don't think he's going to get a lot quicker laterally, but he really is moving a lot better. So that's let's hope that this is just another week or two hamstring issue. But as we know with hamstrings, need to get them healed, because of the re-injury issue there is a big deal.
Do you think we look a fitter team?
Oh, I do. I don't even think it's close. The amount that just their physical profiles, guys look like they've cut body fat. I mean, a guy like Rogic, I mean, he looked like he's down, into a single digit kind of body fat that my wife dreams of. In our household, multiply his body fat by about 6 maybe, and you get my range. But yeah, I mean, the guys are just really look lean.
Yeah.
No, I mean, I just 100%. Thought, sorry, Enda, I was just thinking, in the St Johnstone game, because the St Johnstone game was a funny one in terms of the division among some of the support and some of the analytics community as well, around whether that was a good performance or not a good performance, or aspects of it certainly. But one of the many things I was actually pleased about was just the level of fitness, and the fact that once the game had been won, there looked to be an absolute gulf between those two teams in terms of Celtic were just going for them in the end. Last 10 minutes were just and they'd earned that right through patience, persistence, and wearing them down. And the fitness gulf just seemed huge.
So the fitness is kind of a generic term people use. I think we definitely look in better shape, able to keep pressure up and athleticism later in the games. My concern is, I don't think there's ever been a formal confirmation, but I had pretty good information that Celtic had adopted Zone 7, which is machine learning software to help manage injury risk. And Zone 7 had put out a paper not too long ago about, kind of the nonlinear, almost think of it like a parabola, the nonlinear risk profile of soft tissue injuries with the amount of fixtures that these guys are playing, with how stacked their club fixtures are on top of now international, and with a lot of these international windows going to 3 games. I mean, you got a guy like McGregor who's, he got hurt on international duty. Kyogo did. I mean, these guys just are not getting the break or any kind of downtime to recover like they have historically. And that's my concern, is that our lack of depth. We're almost into a situation where it's a Sophie's choice, meaning that, and I put this in my thread, it's like, do you gamble on rotating some because the fixtures are going to be there? I mean, there's no getting away from playing twice a week and then going into international duty for most of these guys, playing at least twice on international duty, sometimes 3. And, so do you gamble and rotate some, knowing that you might drop points because of that? Or at least you increase the risk. Again, none of these are all risks. It's all percentiles and probabilities. Or do you gamble and say, hey, we're just going to keep, throttling these guys and hope that they don't get hurt? And, I don't think there's a right or wrong. It's a question of which, just like picking which kid's going to live, there's no right or wrong to that decision. It's,
you might love one kid more than the other. I genuinely think, and I don't mean to be disrespectful to any other teams in the SPFL, but I think Celtic are in a really unique position whereby I know the squad depth is less than what it was in previous years, but the likes of Liam Scales, the likes of Montgomery, these players who can come in and do a job, maybe they might not be good enough to push the team on and be there if in the European fixtures, but against smaller sides like Kilmarnock, like St Mirren, where you have teams that are considerably weaker than you on a large scale basis across the league, that you can't afford to, maybe give Tony Rogic or Tony Ralston a rest and bring in Liam Scales at left back and put Juranovic to right back. Those kind of small little things that might go a long way instead of taking the risk of them being out for 4 or 5 weeks.
Yeah, I'm sorry. It's basically a 3-headed monster. I mean, most of the rest of the guys aren't playing enough with the international break mixed in, where, a guy like Carter-Vickers, he's going to get a blow. Starfelt's, it's different with center backs as well. But it's really about McGregor, Kyogo, and Rogic. I mean, you've got Kyogo and Rogic flying all over God's green earth during international break. And really, they need to be playing every game from a competitive standpoint. Or else if they don't, you're going to have a non-immaterial change in kind of probability in games. So, McGregor's going to play a lot for Scotland. They're in a huge window coming up. I can't imagine he's not going to have a huge role to play in that. And, with Celtic still looking at a semifinal and hopefully a final in the League Cup, I mean, December is just going to be stacked with fixtures coming out of that international break. So it's like what we had. I mean, when we had that really rough stretch in September and October, it was because we lost McGregor and Kyogo, and I don't see how that risk is going away given the factors that we just discussed. Sorry, Alan, go ahead.
No, I think this is obviously changing all the time. So I think we're in a slightly better position in some cases. So I take your point and agree with you. And I think in defence, there's no reason why you can't rotate in certain games and really not detrimentally affect the strength of the team. And I think in now attack, we're now in a position against St Johnstone for the first time in the season. Postecoglou could swap out all three forwards, and that's great. It gives Celtic so many more options. The problem is central midfield, and specifically, if McGregor, Rogic, or Turnbull get injured, anything other than that is suboptimal. And there's no answer to that. There's no kind of mitigation for that other than just making do and accepting it, really. One thing I would throw in out of left field is that the lad Scott Robertson is on loan at Crewe Alexandra, and he's doing a little bit of a McGregor in the sense he's having a very impressive stint in the English lower leagues with Crewe. So is there an option to, if he is impressing, to bring him back and use him to cover, because he can play as a central midfielder quite well, and if he's learning in the hard knocks of English lower league football, believe me, you'll be able to cut it in the SPFL in most games, I'm pretty sure.
Interesting. One to keep an eye on, I guess. Ralston is someone that's been discussed in the comments quite a bit here, and as is Carter-Vickers, who, Ralston obviously got the opening goal of the night, and Carter-Vickers got a goal as well. Looking quite solid, quite a consistent starter as well since he came in on loan. Which of them do you want to start with here? I know Ralston is someone you've been discussing semi-regularly, at least, Alan, on social media and in your articles. So do you want to take Ralston first and discuss how he's been maybe impressing you or not so much impressing you over the last couple of weeks? Where are we at now?
I think I'm near having to concede defeat on Ralston and can accept the fact that he's done really well and deserves his place. Listen, as I keep saying, you got to love him. You got to love his attitude and what have you. And that sounds like sort of patronising a little bit, and maybe it is. But he's really sort of holding down his place on merit. James did a piece on him, comparing him during the week there, I think, on the Celtic Way site, and I kind of feel like I ought to do something more in depth on him, probably compare him to the recent right backs and do him justice, really, because this has gone beyond. He's doing a sterling job holding the fort whilst we get somebody better, and he's actually holding his place now, on merit.
Can I just put on as well? We spoke about the fitness and the weight loss element. I genuinely believe that Tony Ralston has lost in the guts of 10 kg or so since the start of the season.
Well, he's a solid guy. I mean, he not only does he run like
that. Enda, how many pounds is that? I'm an American.
God, I have no idea. You guys use the imperial system like
I know it is.
Psychopaths. I don't understand it.
2.2 pounds per kilogram. I know it is. You
go.
think he lost 20 pounds? Really?
I genuinely think he might not have lost that amount of weight. I think he's lost a lot of fat. He's definitely
it's fair enough, yeah.
He's a beefy guy, but it seems to have been converted to muscle as opposed to what he was carrying.
No, I was told probably not this. I think it was when he was 18. So this is going back 4 years now. He was the bench press champion at Celtic for an 18-year-old.
It doesn't surprise me. His chest is massive.
Yeah, he's a very. Not only does he run like a builder, he looks like a builder physically. Listen, you're not going to make him quicker. Again, his body reaction speed, his quickness on the turn is not going to probably improve that drastically, and his distribution is pretty ordinary in many respects. But in all other regards, in terms of defensive solidity, getting into the box as well, is willingness to play the way the team wants to play as well. You can't fault him, and I definitely need to do him more justice with a proper article. He deserves nothing less.
Yeah, James, do you want to go into what you were talking about on the Celtic Way then, and what he's been, what you've been seeing with him?
Yeah, so I mean, the first caveat is that it's 11 games, so we're through one round of the league now, I guess. So domestically speaking, we're not talking about a huge sample size, so that needs to be a caveat. But the production level, kind of his raw output, what kind of chance creation is he offering to teammates? I think we all kind of feel his balloon crosses more than that has a outsized impact on perception for some, I think, relative to the just sheer amount of output that he's had, meaning that, you know, he had another goal. But those aren't flukes. I mean, he's getting into positions where he's having decent chances to score, and he's actually been converting them probably at an unrealistically high rate relative to the quality of chances. You know, he's way outperforming his XG so far, but the raw XG is still really good. I mean, it's like Tavernier level, and that was kind of what I put in my article. And last year's Tavernier, like last season's, where
that's I have to say, and that's without all the penalties.
Right, no, that's backing those out. Yeah, that's backing those out. Strictly from open play. Yeah, that's why I look at it from open play, Alan.
Rangers don't get penalties. What do you think?
So that his you know, open play XA that he's offering for teammates is again, run rate, meaning that he has to keep this up, obviously, and that's not assured. But and the caveat is that Tierney was hurt a good bit of his last season. But if you thought Tierney his last season when he was playing was producing at a good level, Ralston's pretty much matching it or a little bit better in a lot of these metrics. Now, there's one huge caveat, is that at the European level, some of his defensive metrics start to fall off in a way that become problematic potentially. And that's, as Alan said, kind of lateral quickness. He has trouble with quick athletic European level one-on-one situations, I think. And, you know, a guy like, he was on the opposite side for the most part, but, you know, a guy like Boyle, you know, that's a kind of athleticism, quickness, pace that I think Ralston's probably just going to have some issues with. But domestically, he's not going to run into that much. And the value that he's creating and offering going forward, with all of the kind of bumps and wrinkles that he has with, you know, some of the refinement that hopefully he can continue to improve. And that's the other thing. I mean, he's only been in this system for a few months.
Yeah,
so
he's 22.
Yeah, he turns 23, I think, you know, in the next couple of months, maybe. So he's still very young in the grand scheme of things. Half my age, actually.
He actually looks like a builder that smoked about 30 a day for the last 10 years.
Yeah, so and he's been around for so long. I mean, that's the other thing, you know, he made his debut at such a young age. So I think he could still get better in some aspects. So, I mean, I think the big question now for me is, can he improve enough on the margins within the context of the system he's playing in to be a legit European level option? And I'm still skeptical on that. I mean, I hope so, as I've professed he's my favorite player now, because I enjoy watching him play so much. He's kind of supplanted McGregor a little bit in that regard. McGregor's 1A. But yeah, I think at the domestic level, you know, for almost every other team outside of, you know, like a Ryan Kent level Rangers winger, he's more than shown that he's you know, he can hang in there and not only do that, but as Alan said, it's going to be tough to get him out of that position. And it creates a bigger question, which is, you know, when Taylor comes back, who's the odd person out? And I think 6 weeks ago, the vast majority of people, even the most optimistic on Ralston, would have said he would be the obvious person. And I don't think that's the case anymore. I think there's a legit debate and discussion to be had who out of the three gets selected.
Yeah. Well, as well as adding depth to it, it does add that layer of competition, which if you ask any former pro, the having competition element to push you on to levels that you might not have been willing to subconsciously maybe or otherwise not being able to push yourself onto, you know, that element of keeping his place might actually let him go to the next level and maybe outperform where he is at the minute. You're watching and listening to the Huddle Breakdown. If you're watching on YouTube, be sure to hit the subscribe button below and you'll get notified every time we go live. It's usually on a Wednesday or Thursday. And you can follow us on Twitter as well at Huddle Breakdown. And you can get our podcast in all the usual spots. Be sure to give us a thumbs up on iTunes and leave a rating as well, because it lets more people see it. Before we finish up then, Alan, I know you have to go. So Cameron Carter-Vickers, I know you've you've already put your laid your cards on the table when it comes to Jota. How quickly or otherwise do you think we'll know if Carter-Vickers is someone that we want to make permanent after his loan spell?
Yep. So I think he's made a very impressive start, right? I mean, his defensive numbers, again, he's just 10 appearances, right? So he's passed my benchmark for making comment. But his numbers, his defensive action success, his possession win, which are the two aggregated defensive metrics I use. And when I plot central defenders, it meets the eye test. So again, in the top right corner, which is good, you get the likes of Van Dijk, Ayer, Julian, people like that. In the bottom left-hand corner, you get your Jack Henrys and your Effie Ambrose. Carter-Vickers is right in the top, in that top right quadrant at the moment after 10 games. So he's made a very impressive start. Again, I'm led to believe the manager loves him, loves his attitude, loves the way he plays. He's playing like a player who looks like he's really happy and comfortable and feels valued. I would be astonished if we didn't try and do some business to make him permanent. And on the way he's playing at the moment, that would be absolutely the right thing to do. And again, he's probably more physically like Ralston in terms of his body shape, but he's no taller than Starfelt, so he's probably barely touching 6 foot. But yeah, he's been the sort of aerially dominant partner. He's winning around about 5-6 aerial duels. He loses very, very few. Not losing many ground duels either, really, and relative compared to Starfelt, probably half as error prone, frankly, as well. And he's weighed in with a couple of goals. What I like about him, in addition, is his passing and his range of passing. As I said last week, in particular, I mean, he's actually only behind McGregor in terms of pack passes per 90 minutes, which is quite something. And in particular, he seems to have formed a really good wavelength with Rogic. And I don't know if you recall, but the most prolific combination of passing, the sort of relationship, if you like, that Celtic have had in recent years has been Rogic and Forrest. I'm thinking if you can get Carter-Vickers, Rogic and Forrest all playing in the same team, you could see some fireworks in terms of moving through the lines really well. So a lot to like and admire so far in those 10 games. And I think I'd be astonished if Celtic don't try and do something to keep him.
Yeah, I know it's a small sample size, but so far, where does he benchmark against Julian?
Yeah, I mean, like I say, he's up in that same sort of quadrant. He's in over 80% for defensive action success rate, which is 80% is like the benchmark for really, really good by Celtic standards. And his possession wins from defensive actions. This isn't like passing, remove all passing from this. So just from defensive actions, his possessions won is like 98%, which is pretty phenomenal and unsustainable, I would suggest. Again. Okay. A Julian would be probably 90%. So if you're like at 80% for your defensive action success rate and 90% for your possession win percentage, you're in that kind of upper quadrant, and he's well in there at the moment.
Yeah. Blue Mountain is commenting saying that Levy will demand about 10 million for Cameron Carter-Vickers. If you think he is better than Starfelt, will Celtic pay James? 10 million is not something Celtic are going to pay if they're going to be paying 6 million.
I don't think that's right. Sorry, I don't think that's right. What they've done with Carter-Vickers is they've loaned him out every year. They've had him, and they keep extending his contract by a year. So I don't think he's ever got more than a year left on his contract. And I think there was like from what I recall, I think there's a fee already agreed for him.
Right. Yeah, I think
but just nowhere near that.
I think it's only a couple of million.
Yeah.
And I think that I actually wrote a bunch about this on within the context of Hendry leaving Celtic, about the value of player options in loan to buy kind of situations, and how that might be an area of the transfer market that's a little mispriced. Meaning that there's some value to having that option where you say, okay, at a specific price, we're going to test this guy out, and if he fits and everything works well, then we know what our cost is going to be. But if we don't and it doesn't work out, then have him back. So yeah, I think Carter-Vickers, I think if I remember, is a couple million, maybe 2 or 3 million.
2.5, I think.
Yeah. Whereas Jota, I think, is something like 6.
He's 6.5. Yeah, it's
so
quite
it's just
steep as well.
Well, just to put it into context, I mean, the starting center back for that, I mean, we paid what, 7 for Julian, something around that. So, for as far as value, and this is where I think the bigger question is going to come down to when hopefully Julian gets back fit. And I still think that that's a real appealing combination, him and Carter-Vickers, because of some of that aerial dominance that Julian brings. And we saw that with the goal. I think Carter-Vickers is, because of his power and again, his kind of positional intelligence, he does really well against in open play, battling for aerial duels. I think it gets tougher a guy of his stature when you've got people running at you and leaping in corners. So I think it's just going to be really helpful if we get somebody in there who can be, the real ball hawk on set pieces, to kind of clear out like a Duffy did when he was effective in playing, or Julian when he's been fit. So
yeah, it'll be interesting to see how it pans out. We're nearing the January transfer window as well, so we might have a look at a couple of players that Celtic could be looking at over the course of the next couple of months. But that is where we'll leave you for this evening's Huddle Breakdown. Thanks to everyone who was watching live on YouTube. If you were watching live, make sure you hit the subscribe button below. It helps the channel grow, and more people will see it. Essentially, spread the gospel of the Huddle Breakdown. Alan, James, thanks very much for that.
Thank you, Enda.
Yeah, thanks, guys. All
right, the podcast will be live in the usual channels as well. So make sure you look on Spotify and wherever you get your podcast apps as well. But we'll be back again next week with a Livingston. Hopefully Celtic beat Livingston this week. It has to come at some stage. Livingston are unbeatable
at home. We do pretty well against them.
Has to come.
Yeah, no problem at home.
Yeah. Let's hope that it is the title of next week's show is 6 wins in a row for Celtic. But until then, we'll chat to you later. Good luck.